On the morning of January 12, 2021, a plugin installed on 99% of internet-connected desktops checked the calendar and refused to run. Flash Player didn't crash. It wasn't uninstalled. It had simply been told that its time was up. For most of the 2000s, that rectangle, the Get Flash button underneath it, was one of the most common sites on the internet. It appeared on game portals, corporate training sites, restaurant homepages, streaming video pages, and online portfolios. Clicking the button, running the installer, and refreshing the page became so routine that most people stopped thinking about it. What appeared on the other side, cartoon intros, splash pages, and a skip intro button, spinning loading bars, drag and drop quizzes, embedded music players, looping banner ads, browser games, all of it felt like part of the web. Most users experienced Flash as a feature. In practice, it was often the delivery layer underneath the feature. The technology began as a vector drawing tool for pen tablets, built in the early 1990s by a small San Diego company called FutureWave Software. When the tablet market collapsed, the team pivoted to animation and built a browser plugin after Netscape released its plugin API. Future Splash animators shipped in 1996. Before launch, FutureWave had explored selling to Adobe. The lowest price the founders would have accepted was around $10 million. Adobe passed. Macromedia acquired FutureWave that same year and renamed the product Flash. 9 years later, Adobe bought Macromedia for $3.4 billion. By then, Flash was central to the web that Adobe had once declined to buy into. Once the plugin solved consistency, it stopped being a workaround for a few designers and became a production standard for whole industries. Agencies built campaign microsites and rich media banner panels, game developers published directly to portals that ran nothing else, training vendors packaged HR compliance modules and drag-and-drop quizzes as SWF files inside browser frames. Then Flash added video support in 2002, and it became a dominant video delivery layer on the web. Early YouTube embedded its entire player in Flash. Streaming sites and news portals depended on the same plugin to put moving images inside a browser window. The install base grew because the content demanded it. Sites checked whether the runtime was present before loading. If the wrong version was detected, a prompt appeared asking the user to update. If no version was found, the page displayed that familiar rectangle and the download button. Enough sites carried that prompt, enough games, enough training modules, enough video players that most users installed Flash Player once and never thought about it again. Adobe's own commission study claimed the plugin was installed on 99% of internet-enabled desktops. Critics challenged the methodology, but even skeptical estimates indicated overwhelming penetration in mature markets. At that saturation level, installing Flash stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like part of using the web. That assumption hid a structural cost. Flash Player maintained its own execution layer inside the browser process, its own memory, its own rendering loop, its own network access, its own security boundary. Every compatibility it offered was also a new surface for failure. A malformed SWF could freeze a browser tab. A compromised banner ad could exploit the plugin's network privileges. A training kiosk running an outdated version on a corporate internet could sit exposed for months between update cycles. The maintenance burden made that cost visible. Over its lifetime, Flash Player accumulated more than 1,000 documented security vulnerabilities. Adobe issued updates on a near-monthly cycle, each one patching a runtime embedded across hundreds of millions of machines. Enterprise IT teams pushed fixes through deployment tools, tested internet portals against new runtime behavior, and managed compatibility breakage when training modules stopped working after an update. In 2015, the hacking team breach leaked 3 Flash zero-day exploits in a single week, and exploit kits weaponized them within days. By then, fake update Flash Player prompts had become one of the most common malware delivery mechanisms on the internet. At that point, Flash was no longer just something administrators had to maintain. It had become one of the most common ways an ordinary website could turn hostile. A laptop running a page with multiple embedded flash panels drained battery noticeably faster. Tabs froze mid-load. Browsers introduced click-to-play restrictions. The runtime was still installed, still expected, but increasingly managed as a liability rather than a convenience. The fracture deepened when smartphones arrived without it. Before mobile, Flash could be treated as nearly universal, present on almost every desktop, assumed by almost every creator. Smartphones ended that assumption on the device most people were starting to use the most. In April 2010, Steve Jobs published Thoughts on Flash, a public letter arguing that the plugin was unreliable, insecure, incompatible with touch interfaces, destructive to battery life, and a proprietary dependency the web should not carry. Adobe tried to make Flash work on mobile. The results? Crashes, overheating, shortened battery life, confirmed the case. In November 2011, Adobe killed Flash Player for mobile. Kevin Lynch, the Adobe executive who had publicly defended Flash and once appeared in a parody video running over an iPhone with a steamroller, left Adobe 2 years later and joined Apple, where he led the team that built the Apple Watch. Browser vendors responded by buying the compatibilities Flash had provided directly into web standards. Native video elements took over streaming. Canvas and SVG APIs absorbed animation and interactive drawing. JavaScript engines matured enough to run application logic without a plugin. The browser learned to handle video, graphics, interactivity, and scripted applications on its own, the same job it had once delegated to Flash. Each new release closed another gap, until the plugin was competing with the platform it had been compensating for. The decline moved in visible steps. YouTube switched its default player to HTML5 in 2015. Chrome began blocking non-essential Flash content. Firefox briefly blocked the plugin entirely. Every major browser moved from click-to-play to blocked by default to full removal. On July 25, 2017, Adobe announced Flash Player's end of life. On January 12, 2021, a kill switch embedded in the final version of the plugin prevented content from executing past the cutoff date. Flash players checked the date and refused to work. An uninstall prompt encouraged users to remove it entirely. The shutdown revealed how deeply Flash had embedded itself. Thousands of educational sites, archived browser games, internal corporate tools, creative portfolios, government portals, and interactive works went dark. The promotional website for Coraline, built entirely in Flash, is permanently lost as an interactive experience. Cartoon Network's library of Flash games disappeared when the site was rebuilt. Work that had once felt native to the web became unreadable overnight, unless someone rebuilt the environment around it. The Flashpoint Archive project preserved more than 200,000 games and animations. Ruffle, an open-source emulator, now runs on the Internet Archive. What was saved is a fraction of what existed. The gray rectangle still appears in old archive pages. It used to ask users to install a plugin, then it asked them to click to activate. Then it told them the content was blocked. Now it says nothing at all. A plugin that fills enough gaps in a platform stops behaving like an add-on and starts behaving like infrastructure. And when one company that controls it decides to pull the switch, large parts of that infrastructure do not migrate cleanly. What survives often survives only because someone rebuilds the missing layer around it. The rest simply goes dark.